Korea, the Chosen's changing lives, and a religious liberty battle. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we start with North Korea. Those living there live a dystopian nightmare, but the situation is even more dire for Christians and others who follow minority faiths. David Simpson of Christian Solidarity Worldwide joins us to explain what is going on in that country. Let's welcome him here to Newsmakers. Well, David, I want to thank you for joining us today. It has been 10 years since a landmark UN report showing really the dire state of scenarios inside of North Korea. This is a loaded question, but how have things changed and what is the current state, particularly when it comes to religious liberty inside of North Korea?
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for your question. Unfortunately, the situation in North Korea has only deteriorated since the COI, which is the Commission of Inquiry report in 2014. I'll add for a little bit of historical context. I think that 2014 report was very helpful in terms for human rights, because before that, North Korea was mainly discussed only in terms of what the Kim regime and the Kim family were doing in terms of nuclear proliferation and growing the nuclear weapons they have access to. And the 2014 report showed that we don't only have to worry about the Kim regime's nuclear capacity. The true cost of the Kim regime's totalitarian rule is the people of North Korea and how they are affected. And so in the 10 years since Kim Jong-un, the son of the previous ruler, has been in charge, he has really isolated North Korea in incredible ways. But prior to him taking over, there was actually some level of cooperation between the South Korean government, which seems crazy in today's climate. There was a factory right on the border with North and South Korea that was owned by South Koreans. And North Koreans were able to come and work there, gain a wage, so that there was some cooperation previously. There was a communications tower where they had a direct cable to Seoul, but Kim Jong-un closed that factory and he actually blew up that tower in a stunt to show how ruthlessly he intends to clamp down on religious freedom and all freedom of expression, freedom of newspaper, freedom of any form of expression. Even just this earlier on this year, 2 high school students were sent for a life of hard labor for watching K-dramas. So the simple thing that millions of people around the world watch on Netflix every day, and they're sent to jail and sent to labor for that. So when you fast forward to think about religion, one of the most, what's seen as countercultural and the most threatening to the Kim regime itself, Christian groups and other folks in the country that practice traditional Korean religion, they are executed, they are exiled, and they're sent to jail for the possession of a Bible, for holding church services. It's one of the most radical things that people can do in that country, and it's seen as traitor. It's seen as treachery to the government.
You know, let's talk a little bit about We Cannot Look Away, this report from CSW. You know, this report obviously takes a deep look at all of these issues. Take us through some of what people will find in the report and why you believe this is important for us to understanding the current state of affairs there in North Korea.
Certainly. So I'll say if your listeners are interested, they can visit the CSW website. I'll just Google CSW North Korea report, and you'll see that the report's available in English and in Korean. So we summarize the changes in North Korean law over the past 10 years. We summarize some of the key events in the country. But like we said at the very start of our call, we often think about North Korea in terms of just what they're doing with nuclear weapons. And what we're trying to emphasize here is when we only think about North Korea in that terms, there's a complete dehumanization of the people there. And we cannot look away from the people, from their humanity, and from their suffering. If we only look at North Korea in terms of what Kim is doing, we miss completely and utterly the devastation that causes to the North Korean people. So we name some individuals. So we name 3 South Korean missionaries who have been arrested in North Korea, and they've been jailed there for 10 years. One of whom, his name is Kim Jong-wook. So today, when we're recording this call, is September 19th. Tomorrow, September 20th, will be the 4,000th day of his imprisonment. So they've been there for an incredible amount of time. So we're trying to highlight very key and specific things that people can pray for, and people can go to their various governments in the UK or in the US to advocate for clear action. And when it's very difficult to think about clear action with North Korea because it's this bizarre kingdom that we don't really know much about, and we kind of get these little glimpses where we can see behind the curtain. But to have real people, real faces that we can think about, that gives us a little bit of tangible action. So as I was saying earlier, refugees go north into China in order to escape. In October of 2023, 500 North Korean refugees were returned to North Korea by the Chinese government. And when the Chinese government did that, they broke international law because there was a well-founded fear that those North Korean refugees would be tortured. And it's illegal for any country to send refugees back knowing that they would be tortured. So the report also calls for sort of technical policy for governments around the world to call China to account for their refoulement, for their sending back of refugees. And in the United Nations, all members of the United Nations, all 190 or so countries, every 4 years, they have essentially what is a performance review of how they're doing with their human rights records, their labor records. And this year, at the end of this year, North Korea is having their UPR, their Universal Periodic Review. And in that process, all other countries that are UN members have the opportunity to ask questions to the North Korean government, and the North Korean government has to respond under UN law. So we are encouraging governments around the world and encouraging people that read to reach out to their local politicians to say, North Korea has their Universal Periodic Review coming up at the end of this year. So we want you to specifically ask them to release these 3 missionaries, to name them, and to give clarifications and proof of life of the 500 North Korean refugees that returned in October last year. So there's sort of a big kind of 10,000 view overview of the situation, and then clear, tangible asks for governments around the world on how to bring the specific cases of several individuals to light. And we see the upcoming UPR as a really crucial moment in holding the North Korean government to account, because that only happens every 4 or 5 years or so. There's an opportunity for countries to directly ask members of the North Korean government for answers to these questions.
Where can people go if they want to grab the report? Tell us one more time.
Yeah, CSW's website, csw.org.uk, or you can just type into Google CSW North Korea report, kind of look away, and you'll be able to find it there in both English and Korean.
Please continue to pray for North Koreans under duress and that Kim Jong-un and his government would change course. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Next up, Amanda Jenkins, wife of the chosen creator Dallas Jenkins, joins us to talk about her new book and to share how the show is bringing people around the world to Christ. Let's welcome Amanda to Newsmakers. Amanda, thanks so much for joining me. You have a new book, God's Goodness for the Chosen, an interactive Bible study, and this is for season 4 of the show. What is the focus of this particular study? I know everyone has a little bit of a different focus.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of track with the show. We thematically, we will kind of dig into scripts and go, okay, what's a main theme that we want to focus on in our study this season? For season 4, not only is the show itself really has to do with a lot of suffering. We're starting to see that Jesus is allowing his followers to suffer. He's not removing suffering when he's being asked or in the way he's being asked. And that was just, for lack of a better way to say it, true in my life. I was kind of begging the Lord to heal my daughter. She's got a chronic illness, and Dallas and I were really suffering watching her suffer. My co-writer was going through a different but same thematically season of life, and it's kind of all we could see. But that doesn't make for a great Bible study, to be honest. I don't know very many people that are like, yes, I want to dig into suffering. What we found as we were studying ourselves and like really being taken to the mat with the Lord ourselves was that it's really not about suffering. Seasons of suffering really are more about God in the suffering and how his goodness eclipses our suffering, meaning it kind of becomes the bigger thing. Like when he doesn't remove it, it still is really eclipsed when you allow it to be by the goodness of the Lord. And so it was really interesting for me to I always have to grapple with content before kind of giving it away, but man, this time we were in it, in the show, in the season, and in our lives.
No, I love that. And I think, we have such a culture that is allergic to suffering. I mean, nobody wants to suffer, right? None of us want to watch, I have a daughter who has severe scoliosis, right? We go through these things, and it's particularly difficult watching a child or a loved one go through it, right? Mm-hmm. But yet with suffering, our culture says no suffering ever, no sacrifice ever. Yet we learn a lot in the midst of that struggle and suffering often. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all, but I know that is a big theme as well here.
Well, I mean, we're allergic to it. That's a great way to say it. I think for myself, I felt like I'm doing something wrong. Like, I can't get out from underneath this. Like, I'm working so hard. I'm trying everything I can think of. I'm taking her to every specialist in our particular case that I can get a hold of. I can't, I'm praying, I'm asking the things, I'm laying it down in faith, I'm doing all the things, and I'm still suffering, and that must mean I'm doing something wrong. But the truth is that I'm not sure I've ever learned about the goodness of the Lord outside of suffering. I don't think I learn it in abundance. I think I'm more selfish in abundance. I think I run ahead of him in times of peace. I think our nature is that suffering is where we draw near to the Lord. Otherwise, I think we get really distracted at best. And I think for me, it was not only did I have to keep myself on track, I had to keep myself on track for my kid. And so going to the Word every day and being faithful to do what I was asking her to do allowed him space to meet with me and change the way that I was seeing suffering. And I think that's what we see in the show. I think that's what we see in season 4. And what the really helpful thing to me about the show, I love that the show can minister to us even though we're in it from the ground up. Like when I see it done, I'm seeing the eyes of Jesus when he's saying no to his followers. And it just puts a whole new spin on when you're receiving the no, or when you're receiving no, it's not time for you to be released of this. It helps so much to have the visual picture of his face while he's saying that, his compassion, his empathy, that he's the comforter. So I loved doing it in tandem with the show.
Yeah, I mean, how has the show changed your faith? Being there throughout this entire process alongside your husband, Dallas, creating this incredible show that has inspired people all over the world. How has this, from a 30,000-foot view, changed your thoughts, your connection, with the Lord more generally?
I mean, I think he's been good to keep us low, to be honest. I think our suffering, the timing of our suffering, it's not a coincidence that the show is doing cool things and is exciting and all those things. But personally, we're having to seek him more than ever. And I would say he's not allowing us to preach the gospel from a high place. And so I've loved the show, and it's incredible to watch what it's doing in other people's lives. It's doing those things in my life too. But we're not experiencing it in the way that you would think looking from the outside in. We are clinging to Jesus and finding new reasons every day to beg him for help. So it's we're living desperate in spite of it.
Yeah, no, and I think that happens so often. It's very easy for people to look from outside and make assumptions when something is so big. I mean, very few shows, I don't think there is another show I can think of that has had the type of audience and impact that we have seen with The Chosen. And yet here we are sort of watching this. When you reflect on where things are now, could you have ever imagined going back just a few years that The Chosen would resonate in the way that it has?
No. And I mean, I would have thought a Jesus show would stay very small. What we're finding is that for whatever he's making the way in the world right now, to have this be used to reintroduce people to Jesus. We're hearing those stories all the time. I had fallen away and now I'm coming back. In being introduced for the first time, it's spanning demographics. It's old people and young people. It's special needs people. It's every culture. It's in every country of the world. There is no explanation for it other than God is just doing a thing. and we get to be kind of in a front row seat to it. But it's an extraordinary thing to watch, and we had no idea.
Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate you joining us, breaking it all down. The book is God's Goodness for the Chosen, an interactive Bible study. People can grab that and dive right in. I have actually done the first 3 of those books personally, and they're incredible. Appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You can get Amanda's new book, God's Goodness for the Chosen, an interactive Bible study, Season 4, wherever books are sold. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we are sitting down with Tiana Pagan. Now, Tiana claims she was fired over her faith. We're going to hear her out and hear her story here on Newsmakers. Let's welcome her to the show. Tiana, you are currently in the middle of a lawsuit against City University of New York over the claim that you were wrongfully terminated for your faith. I want to get into the different pieces of that story, but let's start first with your position. What were you doing there at CUNY?
So I was working at City College, but within City College, I was working at the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership as the Fellowships and Public Service Program Coordinator. Just want to make sure everything's still good. Okay, you can still hear me? Everything's still, nothing freezing, right? Okay, cool. So yes. And I was in charge of, like I said, the Fellowships and Public Service Program Coordinator. And so I was responsible for allowing students to pursue their dreams through different fellowships. And so we had about 10 different fellowship programs where students were able to pursue internships, and we would bless them with fellowships. And so for more clarity, the difference between fellowships and scholarships is that scholarships is usually just like a check and just a one-off payment, but fellowships is more so programs. So we were in charge of, my job specifically was in charge of curating those programs to make sure that when the students were able to pursue those internships and those dreams and those goals, that we were able to not just give them a check to go do so, but we were able to curate a program behind whatever that interest was. And so that was my job.
Once you become a Christian, obviously, or when you become you become closer to your faith, let's word it that way, because you said you always believed, it starts to impact everything in your life, right? You start looking at things differently. You start saying, what are the things I'm doing, I'm thinking, I'm feeling, how do they align with God? And so I imagine you started going through that process, and there was one element of your job that, was affected by that. So talk a little bit about what happened when you started to realize maybe there wasn't a sync up between that piece of your position and your newfound faith?
Yeah, definitely. So around like March of 2022, I made the decision to make that bold choice to really choose Jesus and not just say, put a scripture and like a caption or something like that, but truly say I'm walking with the Lord. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility. I mean, he tells us to, deny ourselves, pick up our cross and follow after him. And so that comes with a lot of conviction, and that comes with a lot of ensuring that I lived by what I was preaching physically, and also preaching to the people I was speaking to, and also preaching to myself. And so I was seeking an accommodation for one fellowship out of the 10 that I oversaw. It was just one fellowship that I was seeking to be accommodated for. And I would also like to emphasize that, not to say that, every student of mine wasn't a part of that community, but for this specific fellowship, I did not want to be the one to allow them I didn't want to be the one to invest into that part of their future. I didn't want to have to do something that I didn't morally agree with anymore. And again, prior to my salvation, and I was definitely an advocate, I was definitely an ally, and all those different things. I mean, it's documented that I was in protest, all these different things, the intersectionality of it all. But once I got saved, everything changed for me. And so I thank God for doing so. And I was like, okay, if possible, and I knew it was possible because that was such a small portion of my job, and I had other team members and I had other people on the job that would have been able to help me with that. And so an accommodation, I didn't think that it would even get to this point. But unfortunately, my former employer sought to find fit that it wasn't possible because of the religious part of it, because it was relating back to the Christianity of it all. So physically, yes, it was possible to accommodate me, but because they did not agree with my Christian beliefs, here we are today.
Tiana, when you ponder all you've been through in this and this current battle that you're really just heading into now, you're in the middle of it, but you're really heading into the harder parts of it. What are you hoping to see happen? What are you hoping to gain at the end of this?
The first thing I'm hoping for is salvation. I even in pursuing this, going into the conversation, if I think back to the very beginning with my supervisor, I didn't expect all this to happen. I didn't think it was going to escalate. I didn't think that it was going to be that big of an issue. And so even and then again, for context, when this all first happened, I was freshly out of the womb of Christ. Like I was a baby Christian. And I was also 21 at the time. I was extremely young and I was extremely tender, but I still had that bold youthful faith that really just drove me to really just want to fight for the rights of Christ. And so I would encourage the youth to really just take a moment to just really seek the face of God. Again, this is truly just his case. This is truly just his case working through me, working through my Lord, Christina. And so I would just pray that the people that maybe even hear about it or read about it or even watch this interview, that they'll be able to be inspired to want to follow Jesus and know that there is going to be victory. And even with victory looking like salvation, or somebody just saying, you know what, I understand what happened and I really just want to give my life unto God. That's the ultimate goal. And of course, we want to be compensated for the trials and the hardship, but ultimately it's all about Jesus.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time, coming on, breaking this down. We will continue to cover this story as new developments unfold. We'll continue to cover Tiana's story as it unfolds. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching the show, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find the full interviews you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our daily Newsmakers podcast. We feature one full interview every single day. You can head on over to your favorite place to listen to podcasts to find the show. Make sure you like it and subscribe. As for this show, we'll see you again next week.